20,000, but I know it does matter to my studio guest this evening. I'm delighted to have Albie Amankona back. Now, of course, Albie, you were the co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism. You're also a commentator. You're a paid-up member of the Conservative Party. So you are part of Stage 2 electorate rather than Stage 1 electorate. Is there anybody that's caught your eye so far that you really want to see on that final two-man or two-candidate ticket?
Well, first of all, I would say it is a really exciting time to be a Conservative Party member. I think I've not felt this excited since Boris Johnson got elected back in 2019. And the slate of candidates that we have, the 8 of them, are all very talented in their own right, and it's also a very diverse bunch of people. But
just on that front, obviously, having founded something called Conservatives Against Racism and seeing how diverse this group is, does that mean job done for your organisation?
No, it doesn't mean job done for our organisation, because our organisation is all about getting ethnic diversity in the votes that we have. And actually what we saw in the 2019 general election was the vote showing ethnic minorities come down. I think it was at a high back in 2015. I think about a quarter of ethnic minorities in Britain voted for David Cameron back in 2015. That went back down to about a fifth for Theresa May in 2017 and a fifth again for Boris Johnson in 2019.
That's interesting. What did you put that down to?
I think there was a change in rhetoric, and I also think a lot of it probably came down to Brexit, and a lot of the debate around that, rightly or wrongly, did become, a lot of it was about immigration, and obviously that's quite a big issue for people that might be first generation, second generation or third generation migrants. I think that has changed now, and we actually see a lot more liberal attitudes towards immigration in Britain, and obviously we've got this amazing slate of diverse and talented candidates standing for election, so I'm hoping that at the next general election things will be different.
And what about when you start digging into who they are, what they stand for, what their background is, particularly those things I was talking about, which some people would say is completely irrelevant. Others feel very passionately that they don't want a leader who served in a Boris Johnson government. They want a leader who represents their family values. Those issues will all come up. What they're I was looking at today. Their age is interesting. There are 3 of them who are 42, and there are 2 who are 55, and all the rest are in the middle. That's a very small, I mean, really, they're all from the same generation. And personally, I would quite like to have seen some older candidates. We seem to have got into this stage where we want younger and younger candidates. Now, maybe it's because I'm 50 and I now consider anybody in their 40s as very, very young. But it feels narrow to me.
For me, Daisy, the only thing that matters is, are they good at their job? Can they unify the party? Can they win elections? And do they have a vision for this country? How are we going to get back to economic growth? And how are we going to take the opportunities of Brexit and keep this coalition of voters that we married together at the 2019 general election? Yes, all of those things that you just mentioned are important, but for me, those are the issues that I'm looking at in a candidate.
And what about this issue that we've heard it in previous leadership elections, whereby one candidate's team who have a lot of MPs who are going to vote for them, so in some way can waste a few, can afford to spend a few in other ways, they ask their supporters deliberately to vote for the opponent who they think is going to be easiest to win in the ballot that goes out to Conservative members. That, to me, feels like cheating. It feels like it's cheating that electorate, because that electorate might well want to vote for Penny Mordaunt or Kemi Badenoch, but will be deprived of the ability to do that by cheating and jiggery-pokery with the MPs' votes.
It is, and we've certainly heard rumours of that today coming from Nadine Dorries accusing Rishi Sunak's team of lending votes to Jeremy Hunt. And actually, if you actually look at the runoffs of who the only person that Rishi Sunak beats in a two-way runoff is Jeremy Hunt. So there are accusations of that flying around already. Obviously, none of that's verified. It's just Westminster rumours. And I do think if that is going on, it is cheating the Conservative Party membership. We're a good bunch of people. We know what we want in a leader, and I've got full confidence that when it gets down to the final 2, we'll make the right choice.
And also, it's cheating the wider country of somebody who certainly, the Conservatives believe would be a vote winner. And I would agree with that. I would say that somebody like Penny Mordaunt or Kemi Badenoch or some of these others probably would get more votes from the Labour Party than Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt. So it comes down to this selfishness of MPs who are really just looking out for themselves because they want somebody who they believe, a lot of it is about who will give me a job rather than who will win the election.
I mean, let's just be honest. The Conservative MPs that have stood to be Prime Minister, they all want to be Prime Minister and they will do pretty much anything within the rules to win. And there's no rules saying that you can't do any of these dirty tricks. We're seeing a lot of it happen now. I would like them to all think a little bit more hardly and firmly about the electorate, about winning elections, about actually what is needed and what's required to get us out of this rut that we're in now currently, rather than just focusing on narrow self-interests.
Right, let's have a quick look at some of the front pages. Some of them are already in. The Mirror, very interesting, slightly left field front page they've gone for. Are recycling dumped abroad? This is a Mirror investigation. Of course, this is not legal. You're not allowed to send your recycling abroad. Quite often this is, you're getting you're paying other countries to take it and then it's being burnt. Of course, big environmental problems there. And they're saying that that's happening with our rubbish in Turkey. The Financial Times, 8 make Tory ballot as allies of Johnson step up the Stop Rishi push. Of course, this is slightly what we were just talking about, and you can see the ready for Rishi there. They've also put Heathrow puts cap on flights, ticket sales in effort to avoid further summer chaos. Many people very worried tonight about whether they're going to get to go on their holidays if all these flights are being cancelled again. Britain on red alert. Of course, this is what you've been hearing about in the headlines just now, heading possibly for the hottest day ever, not just this year, but ever recorded in this country. And they've got a story about the Beckhams there, our stalker hell. Boris gets new job. This is the front page of The Sun, but as they say, this is Boris Becker, not Boris Johnson. Another Ace exclusive. He's jail sports teacher. Fallen tennis star Boris Becker has landed himself a job teaching fellow lags sport science. Well, I think that sounds a very good idea indeed. Colleen lines up her brother to be Wayne's minder, is there as well. And, of course, they've got all the runners and riders we've been talking about in the leadership election across the bottom. They've also got a little story at the top again about the weather. Bin men too hot to work. Bin collections could be halted amid union demands for a hot weather lockdown. Well, that'll smell nice, won't it? Daily Star, no cost of living crisis at the bloated Beeb. So, Gary, what first attracted you to the multi-millionaire at BBC? Of course, this is the news that Gary Lineker is still on more than £1.3 million a year from the BBC. And finally, the Eye, 8 Tories in today's vote to become PM as Sunak leads. So I've got a couple of seconds before we go to a break, Albie. Who do you think will be on the final two? Do you go along with the received wisdom? It's going to be Truss versus Sunak?
I think it could well end up being Truss versus Sunak. Personally, I would like to see Penny versus Kemi on the final ballot going out to the members. I think we need some fresh blood in there, some new ideas and a new direction for the Conservative Party and for the country.
Yeah, well, I would agree. I said exactly this time last night that I thought Kemi was the one to watch. So because I don't want to have egg on my face, I would rather like it if she did end up on that. I think she's certainly raised her profile. I'm sure she'll be in the next cabinet, but I think it'd be good to see her.
And she had the best leadership speech that I've seen so far today. Yes. It was a barnstorming performance. She got a standing ovation. I have not seen that for any other candidate. No, very interesting. Right, lots more to come. We'll be back in a minute. Well, welcome back. 21 minutes past 10. We have some more front pages for you. Daily Express, Boris loyalists backing Truss to stop Rishi. And there's a picture there of Liz Truss in what I was saying earlier has been described as her Margaret Thatcher-esque blue suit. In fact, it looks like a blue dress to me. But the story the Express have got is Cabinet Brexiteers furious at disloyal Rishi Sunak, and they've thrown their support behind Liz Truss's leadership bid. And, of course, that is, as we were talking about, the Nadine Dorries, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, who are saying that Sunak is not to be trusted and that he's trying to play the election, play the game, and sort of play some dirty tricks. And talking of Sunak, Daily Telegraph, I will run the economy like Thatcher if I win, says Sunak. Another few stories underneath there. Police 2 PC to stop Asian sex abuse ring.
Putin uses prisoners and poor to bolster army. They've also got Camilla, as in the Duchess, will emulate Duke of Edinburgh when she becomes Queen Consort. So they've got the story about BBC salaries as well. And ambulance trusts on highest alert over heat. And then we've got The Guardian. They've got these amazing pictures of the James Webb Telescope, star of the show, stunning new view of space. And of course the leadership is on the front of The Guardian as well. Leadership battle leaves 8 Tory rivals scrapping for votes. Sunak the front runner with support of more than 40 colleagues. Javid drops out without endorsing rival, whilst Dorries and Mogg declare support for Truss. Let's go back to the Sunak story. This is interesting. Does this mean, do you think, Albie, that the Telegraph is supporting Rishi Sunak, the fact they're giving him a lot of coverage? Or do you think most of these newspapers are still deciding which way they're going to go?
I mean, it looks like the newspapers are still deciding which way they're going to go. I think the Telegraph probably just wants to sell more copies of its paper, and by having a headline like "I will run the economy like Thatcher if I win," says Sunak, seemingly in contradiction to the policies that he's put in over the last 2 years, is a very astute way to do that. But I think in the substance of the story, what the former Chancellor is trying to say is that essentially he doesn't think that Margaret Thatcher would be cutting taxes at a time like this, doubling down on his position that he only wants to cut taxes when inflation comes down and that we have to spend what we earn, which you could argue is a Thatcherite way of running the economy.
And of course this is also in retaliation to some of his critics. I mean, we're led to believe that in Cabinet there was a huge amount of disagreement about the way that Rishi Sunak was running the post-pandemic economy, that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg were calling him a socialist Chancellor, that he was spending far too much money and he should be cutting taxes and he should be more like Margaret Thatcher. And so, of course, the Camp Sunak are saying, as you've just said, Margaret Thatcher would not be cutting taxes now. She was very careful to cut taxes when the country and the government could afford it, not prematurely. Because I think people just always think that Margaret Thatcher did nothing but cut taxes. And actually, she waited quite a long time, quite a few years before she started cutting tax.
And she even introduced a windfall tax, of course, and everyone seems to forget that as well. I know that Robert Halfon was talking about that when we were having that debate about whether or not we should introduce a windfall tax, and then we did. But look, Conservatives don't like taxes being raised. Shock, horror. So it's not surprising that we're seeing most of the leadership contenders come out and talk about these massive tax rises. The question is now the right time? Could they add to the problems of inflation? What is the right tax to cut and when? Look, I'm all for tax cuts, but they've got to be managed in an efficient way, and once they come down, they need to stay down.
Well, I've been asking people what they think about these candidates, what they think about their personal lives or personal backgrounds. We've got a response here from Aaron, who says it's a bit, this is talking about the Nadine Dorries thing, it's a bit rich of Dorries to claim Sunak is rigging the runoff when that's exactly how Boris Johnson won his vote. Supporters lent votes to Jeremy Hunt, so he got to the final 2 as they felt it was an easier opponent, which is exactly what they're allegedly trying to do again. Sean says, do any of these leaders have a 10-year fiscal plan or vision for the country? I believe not. And that's a lot of people are asking for more meat on the bones rather than, pretty little films that are meant to rouse the patriot inside all of us. Or fairy tales,
as Rishi Sunak might call them.
Or fairy tales. And then Robbo has said, skullduggery. Hearing you mention it, Daisy, brings back memories of when I rather sheepishly had to hand over my end-of-term report to my father, saying, I'm not sure what that word means, Dad. Is it good or bad? Cue the slipper. I think a lot of people would probably quite like to give the slipper to some of these candidates, but that's probably not a very PC thing to say. Then somebody says here, Sumak says, Enza and I are watching Kemi, bad knock for us. Any other candidate will mean the end of the Tories. How can Rishi stand after his fixed penalty notice? This process smells of a stitch-up. So keep your views coming, and I will certainly keep reading them. Lots of people saying the thing about politicians and their backgrounds, we need the smartest people to be running the country. So that means university educated and Oxbridge leads the way in academia. Unpopular view, but we can't have uneducated people in government. Now, I would disagree with that. I don't have anything against people who have managed to get an Oxbridge degree, because they're clearly very bright. But if all the people who are running come from a very similar background, and particularly if the people who end up in cabinet come from a very similar academic background and a very similar family background, I just think you get groupthink, you get siloed vision, and you don't have anybody saying, let's think about doing this, attacking it from another angle. It just doesn't seem to me that that's sensible.
Daisy, I completely agree. I don't think all of the best people in society went to Oxford or Cambridge. I think that governments and teams of people make the best decisions when you've got a diversity of experiences in your team. Now, what a lot of the candidates talk about are the jobs they had at university. You've got Kemi talking about how she was flipping burgers when she was at university. Other people talking about how they were cleaners, worked in McDonald's, for example. And what government needs to do is represent the people of this country, and a very small minority of people go to private schools, a very small minority of people go to Oxbridge, and maybe that's what's been wrong with politics for so long. We need more people to get in from all walks of life.
And interesting that in this Telegraph piece, you know, where Sunak seems to be implying that he's, you know, the new Margaret Thatcher, he seems to also be implying that he has some background similarities to Margaret Thatcher. I mean, I would say he comes from, you know, having been to Winchester and Oxford and studied PPE, and now being married to a lady who's part of a billionaire's family inheritance. I would say that he has a very, very dissimilar background and outlook to Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, I thought that was a particularly entertaining line in his Telegraph story, where he's talking about some similarities between his parents being, one of his parents being a doctor, another one being a pharmacist, and Margaret Thatcher, of course, growing up on top of a greengrocer. So there might be some similarity there. But I think that's where it ends. We do know that he went to Winchester. We do know that he's married to a billionaire's daughter, made lots of money in Silicon Valley. All great things, all great credentials, but just stick to the credentials that you have and don't make them up.
Yeah, it looks like sort of grasping at straws.
Precisely.
Really on that. And that actually brings us to the non-dom issue, which many people thought had killed his leadership hopes before they'd even, got out of the starting block. People seem to have moved on from that. I think if he's on the last two, that will come back with a vengeance. That accusation, you're out of touch, you weren't paying your taxes, you're too rich to be Conservative leader. I think that will become a big part of whoever is opposing him if he does get onto that final ticket.
I think we've got a very odd attitude towards wealth in Britain. I think it was John Sople who said, in response to a tweet that Alison Pearson put out, which is very similar to what you've just said, he said, that's a very English response to wealth. And the Conservative Party is meant to be a party of wealth creators, so we shouldn't be scared of people that have made money. Obviously, there are these questions about whether or not people are in touch and out of touch, but ultimately I don't think we should be thinking people aren't qualified for a job just because they have done very well in life.
I don't think that it's the naked wealth of the issue. I think it was the non-dom status. I think it was the green card issue. I think those issues were things that clearly rattled Westminster and rattled Whitehall as well. And how honest had he been about that?
But in terms of scandal, compared to the Prime Minister, which we will lose on the 5th of September later on this year, it doesn't really even touch the sides in comparison to all of the scandal that was attached to Boris Johnson throughout the last 2.5 years of government, and indeed before. So I think this idea that, in my opinion, that the non-dom status and the green card issue is going to be the thing that brings down Rishi Sunak, I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's probably going to be more on the record of his running of the economy for the past 2 years.
And what about experience? Because, as I said at the beginning, we've got five of the 8 candidates have served Boris Johnson's government. 4 of them has served as cabinet ministers, and then Kemi Badenoch as a more junior minister. That, some people are saying that will be held against them because they'll sort of be tainted by having, worked for Boris Johnson, and the 3 sort of outsiders, if you like, have sort of kept their nose clean and out of Boris Johnson's government. Does that make a difference, do you think, to the wider membership?
For me personally, my preference would be for a leader that was not in Boris Johnson's cabinet, because they have all defended him on various points of time. But I do think that's probably going to be quite unrealistic. Ideally, as I said, I want Penny and I want Kemi on the final ballot, but I do think it will be Liz and Rishi.
And Penny Mordaunt has, as we mentioned at the beginning, her major question mark at the moment is this issue over trans policy, where she seems to be rewriting history as to what she had originally said when she was Equalities Minister, where many people, certainly the Gay Times and the Pink News, seemed to think that she was fully on board as far as gender reassignment, and that she was very much on the side of the trans lobby. Now she seems to be saying that she never was. It was a policy she inherited from Theresa May. She seems to be trying to distance herself from that. I think she's getting into trouble because I think she's trying to rewrite history. Personally, I have no issue with politicians saying, I believed one thing then and I believe another thing now, particularly with such a fast-changing issue like trans policy, where a lot of people have changed their minds because, frankly, not many of us were very well versed in those issues a few years ago. And I would really respect some honesty saying, I've changed my mind. I thought that it was the liberal and open-minded and open-hearted thing to say one thing, but now I can see that actually that could damage women's equalities and women's rights and women's safety, so I'm adjusting my views. But she just seems to be saying, I never said that, when it seems to me she did.
So I think it's all well and good to change your mind, but I am actually quite sad that this issue seems to be front and centre of the Conservative Party leadership campaigns, because ultimately I think trans people make up something like 500,000 people in the country. It's not a lot of people. They're not really a danger to anyone. I completely take the points that many people raise about single-sex spaces and sports and so on and so forth, but actually a lot of those issues are actually dealt with in the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 and indeed in the Equality Act of 2010. And a lot of the debates that we're having today on these issues of spaces and sports have actually already been dealt with in British law. And what I want the candidates to do is actually talk about what is legal and what is not legal.
So before we come back to that point, I just want to find there is a tweet, I might struggle to find it, that does say that this person simply wants to vote for somebody who can say what a woman is. Now, of course, this is coming down to exactly this issue. So there are people for whom this is a big issue, and if they feel that Penny Mordaunt can't answer that question in a, satisfactorily, that is going to be held against her. I've sort of on your side in that I think it just should not be a reason why somebody isn't deemed fit enough to run a political party and therefore be Prime Minister. It just seems that this should be an issue that people can find a way through, but it's become very toxic.
It's become very toxic, but we found a way through, Daisy, in 2004 with Gender Recognition Act, which then came into force in 2005. And actually, in that legislation, someone who goes through gender reassignment surgery afterwards, in most cases, is legally considered a woman once they've got a gender recognition certificate. This legislation passed in 2005. I just wonder why we're having this conversation. It's reheated again now.
Well, no, I can see why we are, because really, that's nearly 20 years ago, and a lot has changed since then. It's at the forefront of a lot more, more people's minds. More people are thinking about this issue, realising that it can have an impact and taking sides. I think in some ways the reason it wasn't such a big issue back then is because it wasn't on the front page of all the newspapers all the time. It just wasn't something that we were all being forced to think about. So I do understand why it's an issue. But I just wish that people didn't think that they had to be 100% on one side or 100% on the other side. That, as you said, there are solutions and there are compromises to most of these issues. And it will be sad if it turns into... You can just see, we know that there are leadership debates coming. We know Channel 4's doing one on Friday. Sky News, I think, is doing one on Monday. It is bound to be at least one question, if not more than one question. And you think, really, is that the defining political issue of the day that's going to impact us? No. Cost of living is going to impact us. The war in Ukraine is going to impact us. Taxation policy is going to impact us. And I think that's my sadness. I'm just going to quickly show you the Daily Mail, which has just dropped red wall backlash at Tory traitors. As Starmer opens door to coalition of chaos, voters rage over Boris toppling. Treacherous Tory MPs faced a fierce backlash last night as Sir Keir Starmer opened the door to a coalition of chaos. Voters in red wall seats who swept the Conservatives to a landslide election victory, says the Daily Mail, less than 3 years ago accused regicidal MPs of stabbing Boris Johnson in the back. This is very interesting. This is a fight back. They insisted the Prime Minister had got the big calls right and made clear they were dreading what could come next. Rishi Sunak was the first of the frontrunners to launch a leadership campaign with a super slick video. The former Chancellor vowed to be an honest and serious leader. And then they've got a picture of little Rishi, the boy who would be PM, very cute, with his little sticky outy ears and pudding bowl haircut. Looks about, I don't know, 7 or 8 in that picture. But this is interesting that the Mail is going on really a pro-Boris Johnson, we need to feel sorry for him. And I was saying last week that I could already see signs of an anti-Boris surge, as in, it's not that people are that supportive of Boris Johnson, but in much the same way as Donald Trump managed to mobilise support for the way that he was ousted, and some of the support he got wasn't from diehard Trumpian types, but people just didn't like the way that he'd been got rid of, and they sort of believed some of that. And I could see that the day Boris Johnson resigned, there started to be this narrative that no matter what you thought of Boris Johnson, was this decent and fair? And I think the Daily Mail's picking up on that, and I do think that could snowball.
I do think it could snowball. I do think it was decent and fair because the Prime Minister fell because of his own actions. But I find this story very interesting. But I actually spoke to my grandmother and my aunt, I think it was yesterday, first-time Conservative voters in 2019, and they're both gutted that Boris Johnson has gone. They've voted Labour their whole times before. So I think the Daily Mail is picking up on a sentiment which isn't necessarily being reported on in any other media outlets, and I'm sure there are lots of people that would agree with this headline.
Well, keep your comments coming. There's another one here, Dawn saying, I ask, what is a man? We keep asking what a woman is. I'd like to know what a man is too. So I suppose if we were going to be posing that question, you would say, does a man have a vagina? I don't particularly want to go into that, but I know that my colleagues on breakfast here do ask the opposite question, so I suppose it's perfectly valid to do that. But I promise you that'll be the only time I will say that tonight, just so as not to upset everybody. What qualifies that idiot to continue? I think that's about Boris Johnson. Instead of tax cuts, the government should be looking at the oil companies to investigate why oil is going down but diesel and petrol is still going up. Lots of teachers. I'm a teacher at university. The last people we need are academic types from universities. So you're not saying much. That was an anonymous one. You're not saying much about your fellow academics. In fact, there aren't really any academics in this run. You know, we've got, I mean, as far as their backgrounds are concerned, I think Kemi studied computer, or she's a computer engineer. Tom Tugendhat studied Islamic studies. We've got 3 who studied PPE, politics, philosophy and economics at Oxford. Suella Braverman studied law at Cambridge. And who have I forgotten? Manchester, oh no, that was Grant Shapps, he's dropped out. We've got the University of Reading philosophy, that was Penny Mordaunt, and UCL chemistry, Nadeem Zahawi. And of course, Nadeem Zahawi has had an interesting career and background, but he's getting quite a lot of mud slung at him at the moment.
Well, he is getting mud slung at him again for his wealth, it would seem, because of his tax affairs. Obviously, he's a very successful businessman, founded YouGov, obviously big pollster. But actually, I think Nadeem Zahawi's got one of the most interesting stories out of all of the leadership candidates, and I think a real success story for Britain, actually. You know, this was someone who came over as a refugee. I think he was 10 or a child, still very young, couldn't speak a word of English when he came to this country. He says he's British by choice. Went on to study chemistry at UCL. Who studied chemistry? Margaret Thatcher. Started his own business, YouGov, and then, you know, started his career as an MP. Rose up the cabinet ranks very quickly from a junior minister, vaccines minister, education secretary, and now, of course, Chancellor.
I mean, that really is an extraordinary ascent in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
He went from junior minister to Chancellor. I mean, I think that is unprecedented. Well, keep your view. I'm delighted to say that you have been tweeting in your droves, so I'm going to read some of those out in just a minute, but we've just got the Times has dropped. Albie and I were just looking at it. BBC chief forced to defend pay rises for top presenters is the story at the top of the page. Of course, beautiful pictures of that telescope with these amazing photos of space. Really, I mean, just, in fact, they're so beautiful, they look like they've been painted or like it's a graphic. And then Sunak and Truss lead race. 8 candidates confirmed for Tory leadership contest. The Times says Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss secured the endorsement of senior cabinet ministers to the Tory leadership contest descended into vitriol, they're saying. And again, they're talking about these accusations. He praised, and this was interesting also, Albie, wasn't it, that Rishi Sunak is obviously feeling the heat that people think he betrayed or stabbed Boris Johnson. So he made a lot of overtures to say, I'm not going to be dissing the memory of Boris Johnson. I am. So he's trying to convince people that he's still loyal. They're also saying that Kemi Badenoch refused to join a bidding war on tax cuts. They're saying Tom Tugendhat pitched himself as the only Tory candidate committed to following through the levelling up agenda, and Sunak and Truss agreed to take part in TV debates with other candidates. Now, that levelling up agenda is interesting because, again, we've been talking about who of those candidates has the support of the Red Wall, either the Red Wall MPs or the Red Wall voters. And which of those do you think gets the most support there?
Well, I think from the polling that we've seen today, it's Suella Braverman that gets the most support from 2019 Conservative voters. But overall, I think it's actually Sajid Javid, who's now dropped out of the race, that had the most support in the Red Wall. So I think it looks like it's Suella Braverman who's leading in the Red Wall currently. Of course, you've got lots of people on Liz Truss's team trying to big up the fact that she was brought up in Leeds for some of her childhood, and so that she can unite both the Blue Wall down in the south and the Red Wall up in the north. But the Red Wall will be where the next election is fought upon, and keeping that electoral coalition that brought us into power in 2019 will be crucial for the next leader of the party. And
talking of Liz Truss, of course, officially she was a Remainer, and now Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg are saying that she's more Brexity than they are. Do we believe that? Is it possible for somebody to, be such a Johnny-come-lately on such a fundamental issue as that?
You see, I found this very interesting because the Brexiteers, and indeed the right wing of the Conservative Party, seem very split on the candidate which they're backing. I was at the Conservative Way Forward launch just yesterday, and David Frost was talking about how he believed the next leader of the Conservative Party needed to be a Brexiteer. But then you've got Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg, also seen as sort of big stars in the Brexit wing of the party, saying that Liz Truss, who was an ardent Remainer at the time, is as much of a Brexiteer as they are. So I think it's quite an interesting turn of events. But ultimately, I could probably live with a Liz Truss leadership. I think she's got some good credentials, not just in the Cabinet. She's been in the Cabinet since 2014, I believe, but also in business before.
So it's interesting, there was some research, you were mentioning that the Red Wall candidate, the candidate most attractive, according to this research, is Suella Braverman. But that same research said that Rishi Sunak is the least popular in the Red Wall, and that's really significant. Just going to have a look at some of your tweets. Carl says, Daisy, even the most hard-boiled, one-eyed, Tory-hating, hysterical race baiter couldn't help but shed a quiet tear if Kemi was stood addressing the world's media from the front doorstep of Number 10 on September the 5th. I see where you're coming from there. Daisy, why should the public have to put up with yet another appointment, this is anonymous, of a Prime Minister that nobody has voted for? It's all so wrong. There should be an election and they should let the public decide who governs us. Oh, no, that's from Jim. Sorry, it wasn't anonymous. Lots of people saying that, but actually there is a lot of precedent of this happening. There is a lot of precedent,
and recent precedent happened with Theresa May ascending to power.
Gordon Brown.
Exactly, Gordon Brown. We have a parliamentary system in this country. People vote for their local MPs and they vote parties into power. There's a lot of precedent for this. We don't have a presidential system like in the US or in France. So this is a very normal thing to happen in British political history.
I completely understand that it's weird, though. It feels weird, does it, that it's such a tiny electorate has such a big influence. Sean says, he's reminding us, when we were talking about Margaret Thatcher's tax policies, he's reminding us of the poll tax. Then Richard says, penny, please. This is when we were talking about, who would get your vote. Many people... oh, that's very nice. Superfab has said that he's enjoying the show. Richard says that Penny... This is another... says Penny has integrity. Liz doesn't. Richie doesn't. Penny's the only one Labour will fear. That's very interesting. Metro Media Mantra, says Keith. Oh, no, he's liked it, that the Red Wall voted for Johnson. They didn't. He says that UKIP were very strong in the north. It was feared they could split the Brexit vote. Well, there was certainly truth in that until 2019, I think. Another person here, Mitch, we voted for Boris, not any of these other people. So lots and lots of people So Alistair, this is a question for you, Albie. How many members does the Conservatives Against Racism have, he says?
What a great question. I'm so glad he asked that question because I've been waiting to tell people. So we've got about 10 MPs on our advisory board, and it's led by Steve Baker, who's a legendary, very senior Conservative MP who's done an amazing job throughout his time in Parliament. We've got almost 1,000 supporters, and 21 MPs have signed our pledge.
And what does the pledge say? This is about, as you said at the beginning, getting more ethnically diverse voters rather than MPs.
Precisely. So we founded Conservatives Against Racism about 2 years ago now, and initially it started out with a pledge to call out racism wherever we saw it. This was just after George Floyd's murder, and then we got a lot of public attention for a letter that I wrote to Conservative MPs. In fact, it was this day last year that it went public, and actually I think I had my first media appearance talking about this very subject with Ian Dale over at LBC literally today last year.
Can we just scrub that? We don't mention competitors on air, but he is a good man, so I'll forgive you. So what do we think the next few days are going to hold? We know that the next vote, these 8 MPs, these 8 Conservatives, have to get 30 or more. So obviously this is going to get harder and harder. We'll have another couple drop out. Well, I don't know. How many do you think will get through the next round? How many will get the 30?
So they've got to get 30, and they've also got to not be the last person. So the person that even if they got 30, but they only got 30 and everyone else got 31 or above, then the person that got 30 would be knocked out. I think it would be tomorrow. I think that vote's happening. So who do I think will get knocked out?
Shall I remind
next?
you who they are?
That's a difficult one.
You've got Nadeem, Penny, Jeremy, Tom, Suella, Liz, Kemi, Rishi. Those are your 8.
I think it could be Nadeem that gets knocked out next. It looks like, I mean, Rishi Sunak's not going anywhere. Penny Mordaunt has got the second largest number of public backers. I think Suella Braverman, Steve Baker is her campaign manager. I know Steve quite well. He's a very effective MP organiser, so I would not expect Suella Braverman to be out next. Kemi Badenoch has got a lot of support. She's getting people very excited. I'm really excited about Kemi. I don't want to see her go. Liz Truss has got a lot of support. Tom Tugendhat behind the scenes, I'm hearing rumours that he's got a lot more support than people think he would, considering he's a backbench MP, a strong Remainer, for example. So I think it could be Nadeem who is knocked out in the next round.
And who would his votes go to?
This is the question that everyone will be wondering, because, of course, what's going to happen next is all of these deals being made between the MPs that get knocked out, who are their votes going to go to? So we know that Nadeem's got at least 20 because he's got through to the next round, so who will they go to? I would either predict that he will back Liz, potentially, or perhaps Rishi, I would say. Because if we look at where the rest of the cabinet has gone, bar Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who's backing Tom Tugendhat, all of the rest have gone to either Rishi or Liz, and I presume it's because they want cabinet positions in the next government. Now,
I would feel remiss if I didn't tell viewers and listeners about the other big political story that was in the papers tomorrow, in The Sun. I forgot to mention this a while ago. This is the story that Tobias Ellwood has run over and killed one of his neighbour's cats. Apparently it's a Bengal cat, which is a very expensive cat, and as a result, apparently, I understand it was completely accidental. He's been mortified, very upset about it, but the villagers have completely turned against him and have been egging his house, as in throwing eggs, and the police have been involved.
I mean, I have a cat, Daisy, and I would like to think that if someone ran over my cat, that my neighbours would egg their house, but unfortunately I live in London and there's not much sense of community. No, well, that's true. Well, I do feel sorry for Tobias Ellwood. I don't know what the listeners and viewers think about that, but of course, this is the kind of story, we hear. The political editor Harry Cole of The Sun was tweeting earlier today that there was a proper Conservative dead cat story coming, and of course this was, a slightly unfortunate play on words, because a dead cat story, I think it was coined by Linton Crosby, the great election guru, who said that one of the ways, if you're in trouble as a political party, if a campaign isn't going your way, if you're getting derailed by an issue or other, you throw a dead cat story at the press.
And that takes, and it'll be something completely ridiculous, something that's sort of plucked out of nowhere, but that is so headline grabbing, that takes all the attention. It's rather like, you know, if you say, oh, I've got a terrible tummy ache, and somebody says, well, I'll stand on your toe, and you'll stop thinking about your tummy ache because you'll be thinking about your sore toe. It's one of those campaigns. So this is where this is dead cat story, but I'm pretty certain that this wasn't any sort of deliberate dead cat story.
No, and it would be awful if it was. But I mean, I'm just glad we're finally talking about an actual dead cat story, because I think when people take things very literally, when it says, oh, it's a dead cat story, people actually think there's a dead cat. But in this case, unfortunately, there is an R.I.P. to the Bengal cat that is sadly no longer with us.
R.I.P. to the Bengal cat. Exactly. Well, I'm sure we are going to get some genuine dead cat political stories, but I feel sorry for Tobias Ellwood. And of course, he was once being mooted as a possible party leader. Particularly, he's got the military background with Penny Mordaunt. We know, the daughter of a military man, reservist of her own, and Tom Tugendhat. Does that hold any credit, do you think, with the voters?
The fact that military backgrounds, yes, yeah. I think they do. I mean, in the case of Tobias Ellwood, rather, unfortunately, I don't think he has a future as the leader of the party. I hope he's got a long future on the backbenches. I know him; he's a very good man, and I hope this situation with the Bengal cat resolves itself as quickly as possible.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Albie Amankona, for being with me tonight. That is